Welcome. I am Sheila, Signet's President and COO, and I'm here to talk to you about how to find structure in the school year. This is part two. My colleague and our CEO, Jay, did part one, and it was super inspiring. But as a busy parent myself, I did find parts of it overwhelming. So I decided part two should be the Redux, what to do, sort of the survival method of finding structure in the new year. So I hope you find this helpful. And I will reference the first part a little bit. And for those of you who weren't part of the first part, you can find a recording of that on our YouTube channel, or email me and I'll get that to you. So let's dig in here. So first thing I like to do is set the agenda. This is what we're going to cover today. I'm going to recap part one and talk about Ikigai. We're going to do a little reality check. If you imagine that little like record scratch sound, that's what's going to happen on that slide. Then we're going to talk about a survival method for busy parents, and then some examples of what our clients are actually doing and finding success with. And then we'll talk about whatever questions you have. All right, so to recap Jay's part one, and I'm not going to do it justice. Please do look at that recording if you haven't seen it already. He proposed this really beautiful method with 4 parts that fit together and sort of inform each other in this cycle that you see here on the right side of the slide. And these 4 parts will really help you think about how you reframe success and what you want to achieve in the year, curate and sort of pick what you want to focus on, build a really comprehensive plan to help you reach those goals, and then build in a review and reflection process to help iterate on that reframing and curation and planning, and then the whole cycle starts again. And what Jay really stressed was this is the most successful when it is really student driven and desire driven. It's got to be something they want. And to keep in mind that learning and engagement is much more important than just quantity, content. So we really want to kind of hone in on that very special place that achieves a lot of goals for a student or for you. What he suggested was moving from this framing of education or even our lives as though we are on a ladder and we've got to get this step done and this step done and this step done to get to a certain place, and rather to reframe it as something more internal and Ikigai based, where all of these things that you may want actually overlap in a sweet spot and you really hone in on that, and that's the thing that you pursue. And to get into that a little bit more, there's this beautiful graphic that I just love looking. It's so calming. I love looking at it. Ikigai stands for, or means, excuse me, doesn't stand for anything. It means in Japanese, a reason for being. It is that internal propelling concept or value that takes you through life, or gives you something to pursue in life. And it's, as this really complicated Venn diagram is showing you, it's sort of an overlap of what you love, what the world needs, what you're good at, and what you can be paid for. And if you find the intersection of all of those things, the intersection of your passion, your mission, your vocation, your profession, you are living your best life. Everything you do is meaningful, you're making money, you feel like you're contributing to society, you're really happy because you're doing something you're good at and something that you really love. So this is sort of the ideal thing that we all want to get to in our lives. And it is really sort of daunting to think about, well, how do I find all of these things, and how do I pursue that, clear Ikigai goal with just a force of will and clear focus and, all of my body and everything is moving towards this thing. That feels like a lot of reflection and self-evaluation and considering the world and, what's realistic, what can you be paid for? It's a lot to think of. And what Jay suggested was, to move forward was sort of a mix of an opportunistic mindset and a strategic mindset, right? Your strategic mindset is, okay, I've got this lofty Ikigai goal, this calling, but the opportunistic is, oh, here's a choice in front of me. Which one moves me closer to that goal, right? It may not be a straight line. And what he said was zigzag your way to this meaning, right? So think about the long term or the bigger picture goal, but also face your daily challenges or your short-term choices with this in mind, that, you know, you can take small steps toward it. And it may not be directly, it may be sideways, it may be at a 45-degree angle, but you're moving towards it, right? And you'll find that it will get you closer and closer towards this place. This place may not actually exist, right? But it's still something that you can aspire towards. And it's still something that can guide your decisions in terms of your education, your career, your relationships, all of these things, even if it may be, you know, kind of a Shangri-La. So that's Ikigai, and that's what Jay suggested we all pursue. And as I mentioned on that previous slide, there are a lot of steps to pursuing it, right? You find that goal, and you have to curate your opportunities, and then you make a plan, you follow a plan, and you reflect on it. For me, as a mom of a 3-year-old, that just felt like, it's beautiful, but come on, like, let's talk about the world we live in right now. You know, kids have been home out of school for 6 months. Many of them have started school. School is crazy and very frustrating. Parents are doubling as homeschool teachers. There's a lot of tension. Nobody has any privacy or space to themselves. You know, moms and dads are struggling to do their own work and help their kids and, you know, do all the things that they have to do, but there's just no time or space for it. And I thought these 2 memes were really representative. They really spoke to me in particular. And so I thought I would share here, because I think they are quite representative of how most people feel about this. I think I meet the rare parent who is like, I'm homeschooling and I love it. And some people are really cut out for it, but I will tell you, not everybody is. People just don't have the training to do it the way, you know, good homeschool teachers do. So reality check here, it can be really hard to do all of those things when you're feeling overwhelmed. You know, school schedules are all over the place. There's some people who are in person already, which I am amazed by. There are a lot of hybrid setups and schedules where, you know, kids with last names A through M go to school on Monday and Tuesday, and then they're remote on Thursday and Friday, and nobody really knows what happens on Wednesdays. And then it's the opposite for N through Z, or it's a different arrangement of days. And, you know, core classes are in person, but electives are not in person. I've heard it all. And that's just within, you know, the schools in the Boston area. When you think about nationwide, everybody is doing something different. And, you know, I feel bad for the parents who have students maybe in 2 different schools. How are they managing that? And then there's, you know, remote learning that is still continuing for many people as well. And I do think we'll all end up there eventually. So we need to plan for that eventuality. You know, the challenges that our clients have faced is that because of these weird scheduling needs, some of the classes that their students really wanted to take were unavailable. There is also less learning time for students. Where they maybe in the past would have gotten 5 hours of AP chemistry in a week. Now, because of the remote structure, they're doing 3 hours. And how do you expect them to get through the whole AP chemistry curriculum with less learning than they had, less learning time than they had previously? And then another big one is kids are feeling so socially isolated. I'm seeing a lot of students just kind of hole up in their rooms. They don't want to talk to their parents. They don't want to ask for help. They don't talk to their teachers. They are interacting with some of their friends, but it's very different. And I think that a lot of students are feeling the effects of that. So it's really common, I think, for a parent to feel overwhelmed up against these sorts of challenges. Beyond the stresses of that situation, there are the continuing health concerns with COVID exposure, education concerns. Are students actually learning what they need to? Social concerns, the isolation, the separation, and then work concerns, as in how do you continue your job if you are trying to manage all of this and all of this stress? So that's where we get to sort of my survival method. When you are in survival mode, which many of us still are, even 6 months into this, it's really hard to be mindful and strategic and planful. So if you're feeling like chasing your Ikigai or having your student chase their Ikigai is just too much work and there's no space to have that reflection and set those goals. I want to give you something that's a little bit simpler, but sort of a scaled down version of that. And there are a couple of guiding principles that I'll start with. Number one is find ways to keep yourself above water. One of the kind of coaching frameworks that we use at Signet is this idea that you can either be above the line or below the line. I like thinking about it as above water or below water because you understand what below water really means. In some situations, we may be open to new ideas, able to kind of withhold judgment and kind of go along with things, consider other people's ideas before we make a judgment, or be in a more sort of explorative and open mindset. If you're below the line or below water, you can't. Everything someone says to you, you react to in a kind of defensive way, or it feels overwhelming, or it's just, purely negative emotions that you feel, instead of saying, oh, here's a chance to problem solve with somebody. It's, oh my gosh, back up. I can't handle this. This is too much. That kind of thing, right? And I think it's very easy, given the state of the world, to fall underwater with all of these stresses that we just talked about. So it's important for you to find ways to keep yourself above water, and then, find ways to keep your family above water too, right? But it's like in the airplane, you've got to put your own oxygen mask on before you put someone else's on. Because I assume if you are in this webinar with me, you are the person who is sort of in charge of the educational academic matters in the household. And that's really important. It's a really important job, and it's a lot of pressure. So it's important that you find ways to take care of yourself so that you can continue to do this for your family. The second guiding principle I want to talk about is not getting attached to specific outcomes. And in my next slide, we'll talk about outcomes versus goals. But we really don't want to get too attached to or too married to, this plan is going to go exactly this way. Or if I do this thing, I should be able to get this specific results. There is way too much uncertainty in the world for anyone's plans to go the way you expect. So keep that in mind. You can have aspirations or hopes, but we can't get too attached, because that's just going to create more stress for you. And then the last one is to pick your battles. This is not going to go perfectly. Your kids are not going to want to do everything that you suggest that they do. Think about what's actually important and pick your battles carefully, because, tensions are high in most families. Those relationships are delicate, especially if you're dealing with teenagers. And so you may have to make a concession on, how much screen time they have, if you want them to, do their chores or their homework or whatever it may be. And that may be an okay trade-off in the grand scheme of things. But it's important to pick your battles. You're not going to win all of them. Okay, so survival method starts with picking a few goals. And I mentioned we'll talk about goals versus outcomes. Outcomes are really specific, measurable things, like a 99 on this test, or a specific job, or a specific amount of money that you earn, right? Something that you can measure would be an outcome. Whereas a goal is more of a broader aspiration. We do talk about SMART goals, and that sort of translates goals into outcomes a little bit. But when I'm talking about goals here, I mean broader goals that move you in a right direction, not necessarily get you to a specific part on the ladder, a step on the ladder, right? So I've listed out here a couple of possible goal categories. You could have goals in all, these are just the ones that, we deal with at Signet as an educational company, but you could have all kinds of other goals for your family or for your students. But obviously success in school may be one of them, not a grade, but feeling successful in school or feeling confident, something like that. Being engaged in online learning, as opposed to, having their camera off and doing something else while the teacher is talking or while they're watching a video or whatever it happens to be. It could be around content mastery. They feel like they really understand a concept and they can connect it to other things. That may not show up on a test, but if they've really learned it, that's going to do well for them at some point. It might be a goal around social interaction, maturity, executive functioning. It's a big one right now. People are realizing their kids didn't have all the executive function skills they thought they had. So that's a good one. We're seeing a lot of that. Creativity is one that I'm seeing too. I'm working with a student on poetry, which I'm loving. He's just writing poetry for me every week, and we talk about it, and I think that's really great, and I'm so proud of his parents for thinking like, yeah, this is what we want to do to keep him engaged. Critical thinking, problem solving, you know, all very important life skills, and they could be the focus of this fall for you, and I'm sure there are other categories you can think of, but you want to remember that you want to pick these goals carefully. You can't possibly have a goal in every category. I mean, you could, but it's probably not going to happen. So be realistic, and again, pick your battles and think about what's most important this year for your student, and really choose one or two things to focus on, with the expectation that they're going to, you know, do everything they need to do for school, but maybe they're just two things that you're really trying to move the needle on and help them own and get better at. And once you've picked your goals, you need to stop, collaborate, and listen, as Vanilla Ice would say. You want to try to get your kids to set these goals for themselves. So, you know, I'm telling you, here's your plan, but it's actually your kid's plan, right? So once you get an understanding of this framework, you've got to take it to them and figure out how to get them involved. It's a give and take. You might pick a few and let them pick a few of their own, and keep it realistic, both in terms of like what they can achieve in a given time frame, and also how many goals they can achieve. What I've got in here is a little tool that I like to use with students when we're starting this kind of process. I have them fill this out. Either they take it and they fill it out on their own, or we talk through it and I just write things down. And they don't have to get to all 10 for every column, but it really helps me understand the things that they are actually interested in. And there are a lot of ways to, you know, pull from the various responses they give to put together an independent project or a set of goals around. I've got a student who's working on public speaking. And there were a number of things in here that, you know, he wanted to learn about Warren Buffett and somebody else and somebody else. So I actually assigned him some books to read and then presentations to give me. And so in that way, he's doing those things, but he's also practicing his public speaking skills. Right? So you can get really creative with something like this, especially if a student doesn't really know where to start. Something like this can be really helpful. And then once you've got those goals and you have an idea of what your student's actually willing to do, you've got to make a plan. And you could make a really complicated plan, you know, 30 minutes this day, 45 minutes this day, you know, plan out for the next 12 weeks. But I think a simple plan is a better place to start. And what I like is this model of what, how, and when. So you take a piece of paper, you divide it into 3 columns. You've got a what column, a how column, and a when column. And your whats are the things you need to do. And this can start as, you know, large scale or small scale as you want, but I'll use the example of, let's say you have to write a paper. So the what is write a paper, right? The how are the specific steps of writing that paper. So, you know, maybe you've got to write a paper on some book. So first you got to read the book. Second, you got to gather your ideas and quotations. Third, you got to write an outline. Fourth, you got to write a draft. Fifth, you got to revise that draft, right? Say 5 steps in our how. And then next to each of those 5 steps in the how column, you're going to write a when. When is this thing going to get done? When am I going to do this work, right? And it should be a when am I going to do this work, not this work needs to be done by. Right? So they should be thinking about, okay, Wednesday afternoon at 7 p.m., I'm going to take an hour and I'm going to write my outline, right? And the more specific they can be, the better. And they need to be realistic about this too. But there you have just a whole map of this writing a paper project. You've got all the steps and you've got when the work is going to get done. Then the trick is to get them to do it when they said they're going to do it. But if they've made this plan, it's much more likely that they are going to do it, rather than if you've made this plan for them, right? So it's a really simple method of just what, how, when, and you can break anything into this, right? If it is a larger goal, like working on a public speaking skill, your hows could be a number of different approaches to that. You know, maybe you're gonna read a book about it, you're gonna watch some video tutorials, you're going to work with a speech therapist or a public speaking coach, you're going to practice in front of your dog, you know, all of those different things that you could do, and then have a when for each one of them. And then the last part of this process is to review and reflect. This is something that, you know, Jay stressed in his model, and it's also in my model, because this is a really important part of this learning cycle, right? So you start by generating some ideas, you know, work towards those ideas, and then you have to think about, well, what went well, what didn't go well, and what can we do better next time, so that the next time you do this whole thing, which will happen over and over again, you can be constantly learning and iterating on how you set a goal, or how you do your planning, or even how you hold yourself accountable to that plan. And the more you reflect, the more you will learn, and the better your kids will become at setting these goals for themselves and sort of living this way. All right. Now we'll get to the examples. I realize this has gone very, very quickly, so we'll have lots of time for questions. We sent out this flyer. I don't remember when we did it, at the beginning of August, maybe, and immediately got just tons of interest in this. We're doing something we're calling team tutoring, which stands for attraction, enrichment, accountability, and mastery. And we felt that that really covered the spectrum of things that parents felt their students were struggling with remote learning back in the spring. And what this is a really flexible way of working with our tutors or mentors to help the student just do better in school, feel better about school, like get more out of their education, that sort of thing. I've got some examples I'll tell you about with our clients and what they're doing, because not everybody has a whole team of tutors. Maybe it's just one thing or another. So my example for skill building is I have a student who is working on public speaking in the way that I talked about, and he's just giving me presentations every weekend, and I'm really enjoying it. I'm learning a lot of stuff, but he's really excited about it too, because he's not having to do outside work to figure out what his presentation is going to be on. They're on the things that he's learning in school. But he's learning all sorts of things, like how to build a good PowerPoint presentation, and Zoom kind of norms, and what you should do to keep a meeting more interesting, that kind of thing. And so that's a really fun thing that client is doing. We have a lot of people just doing academic support, and that may be with a team. I've got a group of students from a high school outside of Boston who are doing an hour of chemistry and an hour of algebra tutoring every week in a small group. And they're loving the group dynamic, because that's a very different dynamic than their Zoom classroom. But they're also working with a really inspiring tutor who can help them with the challenges they're having in those classes, and also helping them kind of delve a little bit more deeply into those subjects, because they are also very interested in those subjects on their own. We've got a number of people doing enrichment, and enrichment is just really, when they want to explore a topic, they're not having problems with it, but they want to explore it more than their current schooling can offer. So I do have that poetry student, and we're working on 2 poems every weekend for about a half an hour. I'm showing him poetry, he's writing poetry, we're listening to music together and talking about lyricism. And that honestly is like the most fun thing that we do at Signet, because most of our tutors are master's or PhD students. I have a PhD in literature. I never get to teach people literature. So I'm just so excited that I get to do that. So when there's that kind of enthusiasm from both the tutor and the student, it's a really magical relationship. And at the end of the day, it's really just about mentorship, right? We can talk about anything else that's going on in his schooling. And, eventually we'll talk about the SAT and we'll talk about college and all that stuff. But right now it's really about the relationship and just pursuing something that he's super interested in. I've got a lot of students doing coaching. So we do academic coaching, which is really focused on executive functions, but also broad academic skills like note-taking and reading comprehension skills, how to write a paper, things like that. what one of my clients told me, and I thought her phrasing was so great, was that she really wanted someone else to keep a pulse on how her son was doing in school, because she couldn't keep up with all of the updates, and trying to talk to her son was like, well, it's fine, mom, leave me alone. And so he's now got a coach that he confides in quite a bit, and they've been able to explore, what's happening in all of his different classes. And that coach has a call with the client once a month to say, this is what's happening. I think he needs this kind of tutor, or you might want to talk to him about this sort of thing that's going on. And it's a really great way to have a role model and a mentor kind of structured relationship around broader academic skills, but still just give the student, someone to look up to and someone to interact with in this way. I think a lot of students had that kind of relationship with a teacher at school, or maybe a couple of teachers at school, maybe someone who ran one of their extracurriculars, but now that it's online, that dynamic is a little bit different. And then finally, I got a lot of people doing kind of college-focused things, whether it's getting creative about how to pursue extracurricular activities in the pandemic, coming up with independent projects, getting started on college research. Even if you can't visit a school, there's a lot you can learn about, how you might fit onto a college campus, starting to do some reflection to think about essays, even if they're not a senior yet. And then, of course, putting together a test prep plan, not necessarily starting test prep, because I think a lot of tests are getting canceled this fall, but doing some diagnostic work to see what they're actually going to need and making a plan for when they're going to prep and what they need to do about it. And in a way, this is kind of giving them some academic engagement as well. If they are prepping or just doing diagnostic tests, I had a student tell me, they thought they weren't going to start until November because he's going to test in March, but he was like, I think I really want to start now because I miss using my brain. Like, I need to learn something. I need to do something. So he's got started with his tutor a little bit earlier because he really wanted that kind of rigorous structure and practice. So I give these examples to just say the kind of possibilities are endless. Of course, these are examples of people using an outside tutor, but there's certainly a lot of these things that students can do for themselves, or with maybe an older cousin or some other sort of mentor that they have a relationship with. And I think that in this pandemic, we're all sort of like realizing how important school is, not just for our students, but also for our own, sanity and ability for us to, be the leaders of our family and do our work and have those roles as well. And when school is different in the way that it is now, we've got to supplement somewhere, right? So I encourage you to ask for help from other people, because it does take a village, especially now. Great, so that's my presentation. I hope this feels a little bit more doable, and I hope it feels like, a little bit of hope that there are things you could do to keep your kids engaged, and they'll learn and they'll become, fully realized humans under your watch, even in this strange situation. But I just want to open up to questions. Joy or Paige, if you have any. I saw some chats come through, but I didn't look at them. So we can go to those questions if there are any. I'll just stop my screen share.
Paige asks, I wonder if you ever get a client who really doesn't want your services, but your parents signed you up.
Yeah, we do get that. And then it becomes very obvious that they don't want to be there and the parents sign them up. But our secret sauce really at Signet is pairing students with really cool mentors. Not cool in like he's wearing sunglasses and driving a motorcycle, but like, someone who really gets the student. And that's a big part of our process is, if you call me and you say you've got this academic challenge or whatever, I'm going to ask you questions like, what is your student interested in? What would they rather be doing than school? Who have their favorite teachers been and why do you think they liked them? And I really try to get a lot of information so I can understand the personality that is going to motivate your student. So I think it's very common that students don't really want extra help or tutoring or whatever it is for a number of reasons. But it's very rare that once they meet their tutor, they don't want to do it anymore. Our tutors are really great at building those connections and inspiring students. And Joy, that's a great question. I think it's really hard. It's a thing that I struggle with as well. Just getting up, I'm like at my desk all day long. So I think that it has to start with him recognizing like how valuable taking a break for his eyes and for his body is. And so maybe there is a tool you can use that is a reminder for him to do that. I know there are a lot of things like that, whether it's like a wearable or just an alarm he sets, or a routine he has. It might be after every class, I'm gonna go get some water, and at least that moves him. Or maybe instead of sitting on a chair, he sits on a yoga ball, because then there's movement already. He's engaging his core and things like that. So I think there are a lot of different ways to approach that, but I think it's got to start with the mindset. It's great that he's chatting with his friends. It's probably one of the only opportunities he has to do that. But maybe they can make it into, I don't know, something more active where they all have to, run up and down the stairs twice or something before they can chat each other. I don't know if that's realistic, but yeah.
Paige is asking, what are you finding in terms of tools or approaches that help students keep their heads above water?
So I think mindfulness is a really big one. And there are some really great apps for it. Headspace is a really great one. There's another one called Breathe. There are a lot of apps now that are like nighttime wind down apps. I don't know if you've seen any of these, Savannah. I've been using them. One is called, I'm forgetting what it's called now. Well, we'll have to look it up and send it out. But it's basically this like really beautiful graphic that you're staring at on your phone, and the phone is like slowly dimming, and you're coloring things in, and it's kind of a guided meditation. So I think that is really helpful. I think the process of reflection is really important. One of the things I didn't say on that slide is you need to decide how often you're going to reflect. You can't do it every day. Like, it's really hard to be in it and doing the work and then step back and say, okay, what am I doing wrong, or what can I do better, or any of that. But once a week, once a month, I think those are reasonable timeframes for that. And if you can make that into a habit, students can start to see their own patterns, and start to understand what they may need to feel like they have a foothold, to feel like they know who to ask for help, that sort of thing. Bribes and rewards. That's a great question. I am the mother of a 3-year-old, so yes, I'm using bribes and rewards all the time. You've just got to be careful how you use them. I think they work. Positive reinforcement has been proven to work much better than, the threat of grounding or taking away a video game or a phone or whatever. But it's as much about you being disciplined in your rewarding system as it is about the student doing the thing that earns the rewards. There's a really great book about this that I just bought, and it's not at my fingertips. It's another thing that we can send you, Paige, if you want to send it out to all of your people. I know you've got a big network.
Paige is asking, is it helpful to set goals for the future, like in planning to take a trip or a hike?
I think that can be helpful, because it's almost a reward in itself. If we get through this week, we can go on, do this fun thing. The challenge may be if that trip or hike has to get canceled, and then it can be very frustrating. So I live in Los Angeles, and we have not been able to do anything outside for a little while because there are these terrible wildfires and the air quality is terrible. We can't get outside. So, I know a lot of people had plans for last weekend or the weekend before, and they're all just canceled. Can't even hang out in my backyard. So I think you want to be realistic about your plans, but certainly planning something exciting for the future can be a good motivator.
Any more questions? I'm going to put our number in the chat as well, in case either of you guys want to call and just chat and say hi.
Great.
For coming and saying hi and having a good time. And if neither of you have any questions, I think this might be a good place to stop. What do you think?
Yeah, great. Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Paige, and thank you, Joy, for coming. And we hope to hear from you if you have any other questions. All right. Good night, everybody.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.